Good afternoon. My name is Jerry, and I'm from DASYDministry.org. Do as Yeshua did here in Alberta, Canada. I hope the following teaching will help somebody better understand the living word of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who is Yahweh in Yeshua. Today I'm going to talk about communion, or the Last Supper. A lot of people, a lot of organizations over the years have been taking communion, but many people don't understand its origin. Hopefully, I will be able to explain it a little bit here. Some people take communion, or the body and the blood, out of the Seder meal. Some people take it out of the Last Supper. These are things that we should know about so we can better understand how to properly take communion. Why some use unleavened bread and why some use regular type bread has been a mystery to many people. There appears to be some legitimate confusion in this regard. There's no question. But there is and can be no confusion in regards to the wine that always accompanies communion. There is no such thing as juice referred to in regards to the symbolism of the body and the blood. In those days, there was no refrigeration, so no juice existed more than perhaps a few days when they were harvesting a crop. After a few days, fermentation takes over and juice quickly turns into wine. For this simple reason, whether you take your communion with leavened bread or unleavened bread, there's no question about the wine that you take it with, not juice. The Last Supper is not Passover. The Last Supper was the evening before Passover, John 13:1. Now before the feast of Passover, Yeshua, knowing that his hour had come, that he would depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Yeshua celebrated the Last Supper with his disciples on the eve of the preparation day. Yeshua had to get Judas the leaven out of the house because all leaven had to be removed before Passover, which was drawing near. John 13:26-28. Yeshua would have also celebrated the Seder after the Last Supper. Most Messianic Jews celebrate the Seder meal with the Passover so that they can see and connect all the symbolism involved. The meal that Yeshua had the day prior to the official Seder meal is called Mashiach's meal. Now, a quick note here that might be of interest. The Pharisees are actually the ones who had their Seder meal on the 15th of Nisan, and the Sadducees had their meal on the 14th. There was oftentimes discrepancies between the two groups. This is an obvious one. Partaking of the body and the blood. Yeshua partook of the Last Supper the day before Passover because he knew he would be killed at Passover, just as the lambs he was replacing had been sacrificed for thousands of years previous. He probably kept the Last Supper just before sundown, and then the Seder immediately after sundown on the eve of the 13th. There are three basic ways people partake of the body and the blood of Yeshua in regards to what is commonly called communion. They're as follows. Some keep communion as Yeshua did. It's kept the evening before Passover, and it is kept with red wine and regular type challah bread, the Last Supper. Many claim communion may also be kept at Passover with unleavened bread, matzah, and red wine. And as I explained earlier, the two occasions can also be taken together with sundown in between, as Yeshua most likely did. One with challah bread and one with unleavened bread. That is the way I do it. There's something I believe is worth bringing to attention here. It's in regards to the loaf of challah bread. Yeshua is the bread of life, born in the bread basket, Bethlehem. When we partake of the bread, he represents the loaf as a whole, and we are also represented in the bread as in unity, echad, in him. I believe that when taking communion, we should pass around the challah and each pinch off a tiny piece of Yeshua, our bread of life. When we all participate in such a manner, we are all part of the whole body, loaf of bread, in unity with each other and our Messiah, Yeshua. Hollow bread, which should be used, is symbolic of the bumps, hills of the land of Israel and the faces of the people. In many churches, you will see people passing around the wafers of sort that are not part of the whole, in my opinion. This is completely improper. As a matter of fact, when you think about a round wafer being passed out, you got to be a little nervous about that. A round wafer, what is a round wafer? What is round represented in those days? The god of the sun. It was a pagan tradition. So the round wafer given out by, let's say, Roman Catholics is, of course, in reference to the sun god. 1 Corinthians 10:17. Since there is one bread, we who are many are of one body, for we all partake of the one bread. That's what I was just talking about. 1 Corinthians 12:12. For even as the body is one, and yet has many members, and all the members of the body, though they are many, are one body, so also is Messiah. For by one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, whether Jews or Greeks, whether slaves or free, and we were all made to drink of the one Spirit. As we who are born again and Spirit-filled all have various spiritual gifts, we are all part of the body of Yeshua, the bread of life. 1 Corinthians 1, 4-31. The common verses used prior to communion are as follows. 1 Corinthians 11, 21-24. Therefore, when you meet together, it is not to eat the Lord's Supper. For in your eating, each one takes his own supper first. And one is hungry and another is drunk. What? Do you not have houses in which to eat and drink? Or do you despise the church of God and shame those who have nothing? What shall I say to you? Shall I praise you? In this I will not praise you. For I received from the Lord that which I also delivered to you, that the Messiah Yeshua, in the night which he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way he took the cup also after supper, saying, "This cup is the renewed covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me." One of the key parts I believe many people miss when hearing or reading these scriptures is the part about "do this in remembrance of me." Many people feel they need to work themselves up for communion. They need to get prepared for communion. The key is not preparation. The key is doing it in remembrance of Messiah Yeshua. If one is truly a believer, he should never have a problem participating in communion as often as he wishes. A point that should also be made here is that in the original Hebrew, the word hadash is used. Hadash means renewed, not new. This is the same word used in regards to the sliver of the moon. It is in reference, of course, to Jeremiah 31, 27-40. There is no new covenant. The Mount Sinai covenant was simply renewed. Luke 22, 13-15. And they left and found everyone just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. When the hour had come, he reclined at the table and the apostles with him. And he said to them, "I have earnestly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer." This supper, called the Last Supper, took place on the preparation day. When the hour had come is referring to the hour Yeshua spent specifically reclining at the triclinium table with his disciples having the supper. That's the name of the type of table that they used to use when they got together to have a special meal. It was a special U-shaped table where you kind of laid out on the table and had your heads, you might say, facing each other. Triclinium table is what it was actually called. Now, this is not referring to a Passover hour, as many believe. This is referring to the hour Yeshua spent specifically reclining at the triclinium table. Yeshua was participating in the Passover meal the day before with his disciples for the last time. He participated, but did not complete the supper. Luke 22:17-19. And when he had taken a cup and given thanks, he said, "Take this and share it among yourselves, for I say to you, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine, from now until the kingdom of Yah comes." Yeshua was saying, this cup represents the renewed covenant in my blood. And when he had taken some bread and given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." He was telling them that what they were doing was they were rehearsing for hundreds of years in the Seder meal. The Jews had been doing the Seder meal for hundreds of years and not fully understanding why. Yeshua is here revealing it to them. This is what it was all about. That was a shadow. I am now here. The same was done with the challah bread, twisted and beaten, representing his body. 1 Corinthians 11:22-30. The Greek word used here for bread, artos, Strong's 740, bread with yeast. The Greek word for unleavened bread is azumos, Strong's 106. Now, some say whoever translated the original Hebrew into Greek made an error here because he did not understand anything about Passover. They say that the translator simply made an error and both the meanings of bread should be the same. They assume that because it's all about Passover that both words used for bread here should be azumos. This has caused division among many fellowships as to exactly how unleavened bread and leavened bread were used at and prior to Passover, and exactly what order. The 14th of Nisan, which is commonly referred to as the night of the Last Supper, is considered as part of Passover, but it is literally not. It is not a high Sabbath, Mark 14:12. Unleavened bread and Passover are actually the same, Luke 22:1. In common usage, even back then, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is a 7-day feast, is called Passover. Luke 22:1. Now the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is called the Passover, was approaching. Luke 22:7-8. Then came the first day of unleavened bread, on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed. And Yeshua sent Peter and John, saying, "Go and prepare the Passover for us, so that we may eat it." Matthew 26:17. Now on the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Yeshua and asked, "Where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover?" We see here an error made in almost all translations. In most Bibles, this is misdirected. Notice in the KJV, the day is in brackets. People seem to forget about that. Things that are in brackets, you have to figure out why they're in brackets, what it means. Anyways, the day is in brackets. And in the NAS, for example, the first is in brackets. It was not there in the original is what it means. It's been added. It should read, actually, first of unleavened bread. You will find that the translators did not understand the feasts. That's why there's so many errors in regards to anything to do with the feasts. It would take several days for them to go and prepare the feast. This is actually the time the lambs were being selected. Let's go through the following explanation in detail so we can better understand exactly when the Last Supper took place and how it all fits together. I think it's also very important that we understand that what is commonly referred to as communion, or Eucharist in some cases, in the Christian churches derives from either the Last Supper or the Seder meal, depending on how one looks at it. Many so-called Christian organizations put the wine and the bread out on the Seder meal and pull the wine and the bread out of the Seder meal and call it communion. It seems strange that they openly reject anything and everything that looks the least bit Jewish, and yet in this case somehow pull communion out of a very Jewish Seder tradition. What I'll also reveal here is that communion, so-called, can involve bread with yeast, or unleavened bread, depending on which occasion one is actually celebrating. Communion also includes wine, not grape juice, not milk, and no other type of drink. I believe that when taking communion, we should do it as Yeshua did, or we may not receive the blessing from communion. Matthew 26:26. While they were eating, Yeshua took some bread, and after a blessing, he broke it and gave it to the disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." Some is referring to normal challah bread. The word bread here is artos. In Greek, Strong's 740, lechem, Hebrews 38:99, which means leavened bread. There is another point I'd like to make out here. Yeshua did not bless the bread. Yah had provided it. It was already blessed. Yeshua spoke the blessing that the Jews spoke over the meals for hundreds of centuries, hundreds of years. Yeshua spoke, "Blessed are you, Yah, our Elohim, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth." This is the same blessing that Melchizedek spoke when he blessed Abraham many years before. Yeshua blessed Yah, not the bread. In Luke 22:36, Yeshua tells the disciples to go out and buy a sword. And he said to them, "But now, whoever has a money belt, to take it along. Likewise, also a bag, and whoever has no sword is to sell his coat and buy one." If it were Passover, how would anybody be able to buy anything? Never mind a sword. There's nothing done on holy days, certainly not the purchasing of any merchandise. People didn't dare wear swords on the Sabbath, never mind a high Sabbath. When Yeshua and his disciples were in the Garden of Gethsemane, Peter had the sword, Matthew 26:36, but it wasn't, you would never have a sword on a high holy day or on Passover. It just wasn't proper. Proof again that this was preparation day, not Passover. Luke 23:54. It was a preparation day, and the Sabbath was about to begin. The Sabbath was about to begin. The high Sabbath is being spoken of here. The high Sabbath of Passover. Mark 14:1-2. Now the Passover and unleavened bread were 2 days away, and the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to seize him by stealth and kill him, for they were saying, "Not during the festival, otherwise there might be a riot of the people." Mark 14:12. On the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb was being sacrificed, his disciples said to him, "Where do you want us to go and prepare for you to eat the Passover?" The scroll of Mark has an obvious translation error. They were preparing for the Passover meal, so it couldn't possibly be on the first day of unleavened bread. They were saying this prior to Passover. The original Hebrew says, "by the first day of unleavened bread." It says that we are to remove the leaven from our houses before we eat our Passover meal. The evening of the 14th in Passover, which is the first day of unleavened bread. We see the same thing expressed in Exodus 12:15. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, but on the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats anything leavened from the first day until the 7th day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. On the first day is a Hebrew idiom meaning by the time this day comes. Mark 14:16. The disciples went out and came to the city and found it was just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. Mark 14:17-18. When it was evening, he came with the 12. As they were reclining at the table and eating, Yeshua said, "Truly I say to you that one of you will betray me who is eating with me." This was just a regular meal that Yeshua was having with his disciples. Mark 14:22. While they were eating, he took some bread, and And after a blessing, he broke it and gave it to them and said, "Take, this is my body." Mark 14:32. They came to a place named Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here until I have prayed." We're talking about the same thing as recorded in Matthew. They had the Last Supper or Preparation Day, and then went to Gethsemane where Yeshua was taken into custody. Mark 15:42, when evening had already come, because it was the preparation day, that is the day before the Sabbath. It was indeed the day before Passover, and the Lamb of Yah was crucified, slaughtered, just like the people had been rehearsing for hundreds of years. We see here it's insinuating that preparation day is part of unleavened bread, which in fact is not. It is traditionally accepted as part of the feast, but it is literally not in the strict sense. The Passover lamb cannot be and is never killed on one of the days of unleavened bread. It's killed on the final day, the 14th of Nisan, in preparation for the feast. Because the lamb is selected, washed, groomed, and observed for 4 days prior to the feast, that time period is commonly referred to as part of Passover, as well as the feast proper by Yah's people. Another interesting thing we see here is that is not very often noted is the fact that after the last meal, Yeshua and his disciples started singing Hallels. Psalms 115 to 118, just as the Jews had done after the Seder meal for thousands of years. Psalm 118:24, this is the day which Yahweh has made. Let us rejoice and be glad. Mark 14:26. After singing the hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. What it all comes down to is this. Each time we take communion, we are symbolically eating the betrothal feast with our groom, just like the grooms of the Jewish people had been doing for thousands of years previous. Revelation 3:20. This is how the Last Supper, the Jewish wedding tradition, and the Feast of Trumpets are all connected. So, if you take the communion out of the Seder meal, like many Christian organizations have, I guess that's fine, but then you're denying that you're associating yourself with the Jewish traditions. You see, it's confusing when the Christians take something out of the Jewish traditions, like the communion out of the Seder meal, and call it somehow the body and the blood. Yet they deny that they have a Jewish Messiah. They deny the fact that his name is Yeshua. It's very confusing. So remember, when you're taking communion, you can take it as the Last Supper, which is what Yeshua did with his disciples. And you can take it with normal challah bread and wine. You can celebrate. Or you can take it out of the Seder meal as unleavened bread with wine. Either way, it's best to know what you're actually taking it out of, where it's coming from, where the idea actually originates, so you better understand. And when you're taking communion, it is a beautiful blessing if you take it properly and if you understand it. Remember, Yeshua is the body and the blood. Have a great day. Shalom.